Yo, Destiny, did you ever read my PM?
What the fuck? Who the fuck is that?
It's Marty.
Oh fuck, which one? I got a lot of, oh my god, who dodged? Um, what about it? What's up?
Well, did you ever read it? Because I was responding to one of the things that you
Yeah, but I
said
would rather
there.
kill myself than have an argument against abortion. We can do it for 2 minutes while we wait for this cue though. What's up?
No, it was just I'm not. It's not even necessarily an argument. I think you might probably agree with it, but you said that the violinist argument was bad.
Oh yeah, so you said,
But
so your response was having sex isn't the same thing as consenting to a child? I think it kind of is.
well, there's more to that.
Hmm.
Let me actually look up the conversation real quick.
Sure.
Because one thing that you did you ever actually read the article itself?
Yeah, I think I did. This is a long
Yeah,
time
because
ago though.
because right afterwards they mention the idea of hold on, I'm still trying to.
It was just like
I
a
was
2 or 3
watching
page
old
thing, right?
videos of you saying people who rage in league
I
dictate a
think
win
it
or
was more than a
loss.
2 or 3 page. It was like 12 or
Oh, okay,
maybe
fuck.
8 pages.
Maybe I didn't. Maybe I read a summary or something different then. This was a long time ago, but go for it.
Yeah. Hold on, I'm trying to find the rest of it real quick. This is the part that I'm referring to.
Okay. We should also notice it is not all plain that this argument really does not even go as far as it purports to, for there are cases, and the details make a difference. If the room is stuffy and I therefore open a window to air it and the burglar climbs in, it would be absurd to say, now he can stay. She's given a right to use her house, where she is partially responsible for his presence there, having voluntarily done what enabled him to get in full knowledge that there should be such things as burglars and that burglars burgle. I disagree with this analogy. I think that this is disanalogous because a burglar is another agent that we would expect to have like moral culpability for their actions, whereas like a fetus kind of isn't, right? I don't think the analogy
No,
holds up.
isn't the analogy just simply that if the person doesn't hold the intention of having the child within them, even once they commit to sex, the intention later on was never to have a child, but just to have sex. In the same time, when a person has their window open, right, they don't intend for a burglar to go in, but a burglar is going to go in. So we can't blame them if a burglar gets in that they should have, barred the window, in the same sense that when a woman has sex and they, get a child or whatever, they can't be held responsible just for simply having a
Well,
child. In the
but
same
that's
way that
because
they
we
bar
have
the window.
an expectation on the actions of the burglar, though. No. So, for instance, like let's say, and let's make this. If we were to make this a more apt analogy, let's say instead that I leave candy inside of like an open garage or whatever, and I know that there are like 2-year-old kids that run around. I think in that case, if I leave it open, I think it's reasonable that there is maybe a small chance, but that a kid could run into the garage and start eating some of the candy. No, because we wouldn't expect kids to have like the moral agency to choose between what is right or wrong.
Hey,
Hey,
What?
Rem.
are we talking about people?
Oh no, it's real quick, Rem. I don't have like 10 hours. I'm just real quick doing this one thing over on Marty. Go, Marty. What would be your response to that?
Why is it disanalogous?
So I would argue that it's disanalogous because like if you have a setting open where a burglar could come in, you would expect to be able to remove the burglar because the burglar is coming in and doing something that they should otherwise be able to not to do, right? The burglar is like an agent that you would assign. There's a word I'm looking for, agency to, right? Whereas like a 1 or 2-year-old coming in, you'd be like, oh, okay, well that's just what 1 or 2-year-olds do. Like we wouldn't really hold them responsible for them or punish them, maybe for wandering into somebody's garage and eating candy that's laying on the floor if you leave it open and you're inviting them kind of in there. The same way that when you engage in a sexual act, you know that there's some non-zero chance that there's going to be a pregnancy involved, and you wouldn't blame the fetus for entering your body the same way that you would blame a burglar for entering your window.
Is this just based upon the idea that some cases are more probable than others?
Well, no, it's based upon whether or not we can enact vengeance, punishment on somebody for an action. So if a burglar breaks into your house, well, then we can punish that person because they ought not to. They know that they ought not to break into a house. Whereas, like, if a 1-year-old wanders into a house, we wouldn't hold them at the same level of responsibility.
Destiny, you could say that the burglar has entered the social contract.
No,
with you.
okay, nice.
But
So like when we're talking about like punishing somebody like a fetus, right? So this argument assumes that a fetus is like has like all the same characteristics of a person in terms of like moral weight, right? Which is why we're trying to move past it and say, well, even if it is a person, you could still remove them. I think that we would take a harsher stance against a person, that we would expect to have some agency in removing them from an area versus somebody that has no agency. So for instance, if a 35-year-old man walks into my door late at night, some people maybe would even even argue you could kill that person or enact violence against that person. If a 2-year-old wanders into your house late at night, you wouldn't hold them to the same level of accountability because
Well,
you
what
wouldn't expect them
about
to make a
if?
choice.
Well, okay. Well, what about a disease that sort of enters your house and you didn't take sort of the necessary precautions?
What
Would
about
that would the person would a person be sort of responsible for having that disease just because they didn't have the sort of just because they didn't sort of make the sort of necessary actions of getting rid of it or barring it from their house?
It depends. It's possible. I guess it depends on how reasonable those precautions are and how unlikely or likely
Well,
the
just
disease
not
itself
shutting
is.
your window because it's a sunny day and you rather want it open, but you get a disease, right? As a sort of indirect consequence of that.
I'm gonna say yes for the sake of the analogy. I don't think you'd get diseases that way, but sure.
Do you think that the person is responsible for getting a disease if they open up a window?
I don't. Okay, I'm not comfortable with the analogy because I don't think that that's how diseases work. You don't open a window and get a disease.
But okay,
like-
well, just
How about for like licking like a door handle in a bathroom? Do you think
I
a person would be responsible there for it? Let's say they get great pleasure out of licking door handles and it's fun for them, but let's say they lick a door handle, not intending to acquire a disease, but then they get one.
and that's the sort of analogy that you want to run with while people are having sex.
Well, yeah, you're engaging in an act that's pleasurable. It's not necessary by any stretch of the imagination, but it's pleasurable. But you acknowledge that there's the potential that you could become pregnant, right?
Right. I'm wondering if there's some sort of like intuitive leap being made here somewhere. I'd have to think about it more, but that's not a bad response.
Sure.
Have you read Warren's paper, Marty?
Yeah.
Okay.
I really,
Just like a response.
for my uneducated bullshit, like I think that if you're granting that like a fetus is the same as like a child in terms of like giving them like rights and shit for moral weight or whatever, I don't think that's a winnable argument. I think that's like so stupid, in my opinion.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last part?
I think a fetus has to be treated as something far different than like a normal human that you assign like moral weight to or whatever. It can't be the same. If you treat it the same, then any argument you make is going to be really fucked, I think.
I don't know.
It's my issue with vegans.
I just don't understand because we don't necessarily treat human beings with certain types of mental deficiencies or like without sort of agency as non-humans.
We do though in some ways. Yeah, I would say we do.
But we wouldn't like say that they shouldn't exist or anything like that or pull the plug.
That's true. We don't.
Depends.
Wait,
where
but
you are.
but now you're making my argument, no? I'm not saying that a fetus should be treated the same as like a mentally retarded human. I'm saying that a fetus should be treated as like not human, like not
Whoa, it's
at
a
all.
fucking 1970 Destiny?
Nice.
Christ
Oh,
almighty.
you're saying that
Ground him, Rem. Ground him.
I'm saying that like a fetus has to be treated as something not like you have to use like sentience or consciousness or experience. You've got to use something like that as your basis by which you grant like moral consideration. It can't just be that it's a fetus and now it gets the same rights as like a baby. Like it feels like a losing argument. That's what I feel at least.
I mean, I guess if there's like a sort of qualitative difference, I wouldn't mind it, but it doesn't seem like, again, just because people don't have the capacity of reasoning, we wouldn't treat them as
Well,
human beings.
the argument wouldn't be the capacity for reasoning or something as big as that. The argument would probably be like something like having a conscious experience would probably be the foundation that you'd start with or something. Because in that case, like pretty clearly.
Oh, so you would then say that it becomes a human being when it gets states of consciousness?
Sure.
No,
Hold on. Let's
person.
hold on. All right. Okay, Beebs, mute if this is gonna trigger the fuck out of you if you're gonna get triggered from this. Okay, good luck.
No, I'm not getting triggered from that.
Okay, good, because I am. Okay. Yeah, so you would say that, like, if somebody has, like, a conscious experience, that's when you begin to yield moral consideration to them. But that if somebody were to grow up, or somebody had no conscious experience, like if you were permanently comatose or something, you probably wouldn't yield moral consideration to those types of people, right?
I don't know. I actually don't know how to tackle that ethical issue. I'm not sure if I would grant consciousness or self-awareness or even agency necessarily is where I begin or end with ethics. I think that's sort of a...
That's what Warren does in the paper that you're talking about, Marty.
Where would you begin
Sure,
if not
but-
there?
Well, I don't know, right? I don't have a sort of criterion of where I begin to necessarily begin or end with agency. It just I would have to look at the specific instance.
Okay. For something
Give it
like
autonomy.
for something more analogous to like abortion. Let's say that let's say that you could like leave some piece of candy in your driveway, and in doing so, you'd get like a really pleasurable smell throughout your entire house. Your house would smell great. It's a really good incense. It works like that. But let's say there's like a 1% chance that if you do that, a kid could wander into your garage, and now you're kind of on the hook for taking care of him for the rest of his life. Do you think that it would be ethical to leave out the candy knowing that that's a potential, and then if the kid wanders in, you just kill it if it comes through? That's kind of that's what the violin argument kind of feels like to me. The only possible escapes to this are, one, maybe the person genuinely doesn't know that babies come from sex, so it's a totally uninformed opinion. I don't know if that gets you out of it completely, but that would be like one way to push back. And then the other is saying that like a fetus isn't a human at all. It has to be something treated completely different. Those are the only two escapes I see.
Right.
I mean, ultimately, the thing that's being left out here of the actual case that you're describing of this, because I mean, the original case that you're describing is Warren's People Seeds case, and in that case, you know, you open your window because you want to have fresh air, and that's one of the highest forms of pleasure for you. But potentially, little seeds can float, you know, like dandelion seeds can float into your.
That's
room
another one of her
window.
arguments. Yeah.
But the thing that's being left out here is that there's a lot of emphasis put on the effort taken by the person to do everything that is humanly possible to prevent that from happening. So you put up the finest possible mesh that you possibly could over that window, and you only open it for brief periods of time when possible. So you're doing absolutely every single thing that you can to ensure that it's not happening. And so there's some question about whether the intent of the agent is something that, you know, is now relevant to the consideration, as opposed to just opens the window willy-nilly with no forethought.
Wait, but why would that? We wouldn't care. That shouldn't matter.
Well, no, it should matter, because in a sense, the moral responsibility, I think, of, or not responsibility, reprehensiveness against the person who just willy-nilly opens the window without any sort of forethought, despite the fact that they know that there is a possibility, is, I think, a lot worse than someone who is doing every little thing that they can.
Yeah, you can argue that one is worse, sure, but it would still be wrong. You're still engaging in an activity that's basically completely pleasurable that could result in the termination of human life.
Right?
No, well, it's a sliding scale, but you're already
find the sliding scale.
Well, no. We're trying to find out what's right or wrong, not what's worse than one or the other, right? If it's a question of what's
where you're going to draw the line of what is ultimately, like, it's the same thing with the consciousness.
Wait. We don't need. Okay, wait, real quick. We don't need an analogy, okay? Just sticking on this issue. We're trying to figure out if something is right or wrong. We don't care about a sliding scale.
I'm not bringing an analogy. I'm bringing in all the relevant moral factors into the question.
Sure, but I'm saying for this particular discussion, we're not interested in a sliding scale. We're just trying to figure out what is right or wrong. Right?
No, you're misunderstanding me, because look, either it's going to be a right action or a wrong action, right?
Okay, that's what we're interested in.
So we have to look at all the factors that are going to contribute to that.
But a factor that makes something less wrong is not something we're interested in for the discussion, though. Like,
yes,
for instance,
because
no, it's
something
not.
that makes it less wrong might make it so that it's no longer right.
Then that's we're trying to.
Interesting.
No, it's not. It's not true. If I punch somebody,
No,
there's like,
that's interesting. I didn't say that's not true.
Oh, okay. There's like 52 different ways that I could punch somebody, right? So let's say I punch a woman with absolutely no provocation, okay? I could punch her with a glove. I could punch her with like a fucking things that you put on your fingers or whatever, the brass knuckles or whatever. I could punch her with a knife in my hand. Like, we could look at all of these.
Always go so fucking.
I'm not. You're the one that brought up this argument, okay?
I did not bring up punching a woman with.
We wouldn't be interested in arguing the sliding scale of what different types of punches were worse than the other. We're just curious, is punching somebody for no provocation right or wrong?
I'd use the brass knuckles personally.
So when we're talking about abortion, we're not interested in like the sliding scale of like what types of abortion might be better or worse.
No. So again, let me try to re-explain my point. The point is that there are going to be multiple factors that are relevant, and not factors as in like changes in the given situation. That's not what I'm getting at. But like, you remember the Jones bathtub example, where he goes into the bathroom and he You know what I'm talking about? I'm just asking if you remember.
Yeah,
I'm not going to repeat it, right? In that case, there were multiple factors that were relevant, right? We brought up the intention.
Yep. Okay. Wait. I remember. Okay. So then going back to the abortion thing, what sliding scale would suddenly make it okay to kill somebody? You're saying it's okay to kill somebody if you're having a pleasurable activity, as long as you at least tried to make sure that they wouldn't die first. So, for instance, let's say that I go and ride around on a fucking dumpster truck through a neighborhood because I think it's fun, but I at least like send a letter to all the houses like a day in advance. I'm like, hey, just so you know, I'm gonna be riding around my 4-wheel massive fucking monster truck through the neighborhood, but just so you guys know, don't be there. Would that make it okay then? Because I took that precaution? It doesn't make any sense.
I don't mean a sliding scale in that sort of sense. It's that there are going to be multiple moral factors, and if one moral factor is present well in another case it isn't, that can make the one action right, well in the other case it can make it wrong. And for example, the introduction of intention into our question can be part of what makes it right or wrong at the end of the day.
Okay, sure.
So,
Can you think of a single example where making an effort to reduce the harm of somebody that is unwilling to participate in that act, as long as you do like a good faith effort to like reduce that harm and you do something for fun, but you could still harm somebody else, with no choice of their own?
Just
drive a car.
a spar, even, when you're sparring with someone, you don't want to engage in a...
Wait, hold on, wait, one at a time. So the driving a car thing is a horrible example. That's not true. If you hurt somebody while driving a car, you are severely punished for it, and you're never justified in hurting someone with a car.
No, that's not true. There are specific cases that can arise when you're in a car where it's suddenly outside of your control. That's like, for example, if you have a heart attack. Oh, you're no longer going to be responsible for whatever harm that you cause if you are no longer.
But you're not choosing to have a heart attack.
Of course not. But you're not choosing to have a child.
Yes, you are. You know that it's firstly, but unless you don't know what happens when you have sex.
Jesse, can I go through the example?
You don't have to know.
Without you interrupting, just so I can make it clear about why this analogy I think works, and then you can object if you disagree with it. Okay. If for example, like when I go out, I can't drive, but let's say I can drive and I get in a car, there's always a statistical chance I could have a heart attack. Okay. So when I go and drive in my car, I do that always knowing that there's a ton of different things that could happen to me that would render me completely unable to make any sort of ability to avoid harming someone in the way of my car, right? That's what makes it relevant. And I can't choose to not have a heart attack. It could just be something that happens, right? That's why I think it's a fine analogy.
Do you not still get charged with like manslaughter or whatever if you have a heart attack while driving?
No,
I want proof of this before we move on in this argument. I need proof of that legally.
It's a very specific in Canada, at least.
I don't care about Canada. I would care about the United States. So if I'm driving and I have like a seizure or some shit, and I get, because like I would argue that like, I think you would have moral culpability there. If you have a heart condition and you're driving around in a car and then you have a heart attack and you kill somebody.
No. Even if you don't have a heart condition,
then there's no reason.
Can literally randomly just have a heart attack.
No, come on, that shouldn't happen to most normal people. This would require
I understand it doesn't happen to most normal people.
That is how you make babies, though. Sex is like the normal way by which you create children. Like this random, like you could spontaneously combust when all the mitochondria in your body produce energy at once. Is like
now you're appealing
to
to
wait.
You're saying that the object of sex is to have a child, which is very.
If they don't know, would you say that they're morally culpable?
I think you have a stronger argument for saying they're not if they don't know. But I said the same with the pregnancy too. If you legitimately like have no idea, you're just like a kid fucking around and you don't know that like having like having sex like creates kids, then sure, that's fine.
Yeah, but let's just say
what
like
you just said though. Like you said that when you have sex, that is what is done to have a child.
Yeah, that's how children are made. Yeah.
Okay, but like for example, I could say that, and I mean I don't want to appeal to statistical explanations here, right? That's obviously not what we're trying to get at. We're trying to talk about something that's sort of intrinsic to the nature of, having sex. And it sounded to me like you were saying that the very nature of sex itself is about having a child.
No, it's not. It's that if you engage in sexual activity, there's a chance that a child could be conceived. In the exact same way
that if you were to drive a car, there is a chance, a very small chance, I understand, but there is still that very small chance.
But there's a huge difference in where we enact the actual harm, though, between abortion and car driving. Like, if you drive a car and you have a heart attack while driving and somebody is killed as a result of that, we can't separate out the heart attack and the actual killing. Whereas for abortion and pregnancy, we can. In order to make this more analogous, we would have... What part of that didn't make sense when you said, what do you mean? Can you explain to me what part of that you didn't understand?
Because you're drawing a connection between a specific type of action and a specific type of outcome. And I'm not totally sure I understand how when I drive a car, I have a heart attack, I can draw a causal link between my heart attack and the death of the person that I hit. In the same way that I can draw a direct causal link between, my engagement of sex with the child that is then produced and then is killed.
No, that's not a direct causal link. You need another action there, an abortion. Children don't just die spontaneously. You have to actually go out and kill them afterwards.
Okay, so this gets into weird.
It's not weird. No, they're very, very.
It is weird. It is actually because
there is no philosophy of whatever that says that when you have sex, you automatically have an abortion, unless you're like talking like different forms of logic or some crazy like non-Euclidean fucking meta-ethic, like epistemological fucking like out of this universe shit. There is no philosophy.
Why is that
are you guys getting so mad right now?
Because these are like the weirdest objections. Because I'm triggered.
Well, it's not. It's a very sticky issue, right? People have spent their whole lives discussing just this one issue. So these tiny minutiae become extremely relevant to a really...
Wait, Red, why don't you explain it to me instead of Destiny right now, and then he'll listen to it in the background. So
No, okay, stop. Okay, hold on. I'm out of my fucking horrible league game that you guys all just made me lose, okay? All right. Starting from the very beginning, okay? The car thing, okay? Are you ready?
2 minutes, by the way.
Yep. Ready for the car thing? Rem.
Yes.
Okay. In sex, you engage in a pleasurable activity, noting that there is a small but a realistic chance that you could create a kid. Okay? Mm-hmm. You have sex, somebody has a kid. Oh no, now what do? Now you have to make the decision on whether you kill the kid or you don't kill the kid. In a car driving example, you're driving, oh no, you have a heart, you engage in a pleasurable activity, we'll say driving is just a hobby, oh no, you have a heart attack, and then you kill someone. There is no separation there between the pleasurable event and the actual killing person. These happen simultaneously. We would never say that if, oh well, he was, let's say that an ambulance shows up at the scene later, okay? And you see a kid in the back seat who's perfectly healthy, and the guy had a heart attack while driving, and the guy from the ambulance is like, well, looks like we have to kill the fucking kid because the guy had a heart attack. That's what you would need to make that analogous. They're totally disanalogous otherwise.
No, I understand what you're getting at. And the ultimate question is going to be if someone, for example, if I were to have sex with someone and they were to then have a child, whether or not because the point is ultimately it's a fine. What I'm trying to say is that if I, for example, engage in sex and I go into that already knowing that I am going to abort whatever child that I produce, is there still not an analogy here?
We're asking whether or not the abortion in and of itself is moral, not your intention. If the guy driving had the intention of the ambulance driver showing up and murdering his child if he got a car accident.
We're talking about what the whole question is, whether or not because I brought this up in the topic of intention, right? Relating to the actions that one takes to prevent a certain thing from occurring. That's why I brought it up in the first place. That's why I was talking about the thinnest mesh that you could possibly
Yeah, but I reject that entire line of argument because I don't think that we would typically say that if you're engaging in a pleasurable activity that could subject somebody else who is not engaging in that activity to harm, that it's okay as long as you took some precautions. I don't think you would use that argument for literally any other activity.
This is why I was confused, because I wasn't specifically using this as a direct analogy to abortion. I was specifically talking about the efforts that are taken to prevent a certain thing from occurring, which would be getting pregnant, right? And whether or not the intention is relevant there. And then you said, no, it's not at all relevant. And I gave you the car example as a case where it is relevant.
Wait, what if we're not arguing about abortion? What are we arguing about?
Because I was arguing about the relevance of intention and the efforts that are taken in order to prevent something like that occurring.
Okay, sure, but even on that relevance, then even if we were
that alone is not going to be able.
Even if we were arguing that, what else
against abortion?
Even if we were arguing that, what other pleasurable activity could you take part in where you subject other people to harm? As long as you took some precautions, it's okay. Like, what other pleasurable activity is that described by?
Are you asking me?
I'm just curious. Like, I'm trying to think of what other pleasurable activity I could engage in where I could subject a third party that doesn't consent to that activity. If I could consent them to harm, as long as I took some precautions first, and I'd have no moral culpability about that.
Well, there's a ton.
I'm just curious. What's one?
Like, if I'm going golfing and I swing a golf ball and you know, for some reason, through some weird stroke of luck, my arm jerks in a certain direction. I don't know why, and it fucking flies through the air and hits someone in the head.
No, well, firstly, it would have to fly off a golf course, okay, to do this. Because
Sure.
Sure.
I'm
okay.
giving you just random possible examples that can happen in the world.
Okay. Sure. Well, okay. Well, let's focus on one at a time because I reject this whole category of actions. Okay. So one, if you're on an actual golf course or whatever, I would argue that you're already consenting to some level that you could get hit by a golf ball, but you know what the fuck is going on. You go there, but you're consenting to that by going onto a golf
let's
course.
say they're in the parking lot.
Okay. If you're playing at a golf course where you're swinging into the parking lot, then you're absolutely culpable for any harm that's resulted to somebody else as a result of it.
That's not true. I don't think that you could be culpable.
1,000,000%.
Accident.
It doesn't matter if it's a freak accident. You're responsible for where the ball goes. If you hit a ball into a parking lot.
Telling me that if all of a sudden my arm, there's literally nothing that I can possibly do, and my arm just jerks suddenly.
You shouldn't be swinging towards a parking lot. Yeah.
No. The whole point is that it's a perfect direct aim, and all of a sudden your hand jerks.
Who the fuck makes a golf course where you're aiming at a parking lot?
He's not saying you're aiming for the parking lot.
No, you're not aiming at the parking lot.
Okay,
Your
I don't know if you know how golf works, but you can't jerk your arm and it sizably hit like a golf ball behind you. Like, what are you talking about?
It's the physical reality of the example that you're having a lot of issues with, obviously.
Well, no, I'm curious because I reject this whole category of behaviors. So I'm asking for one example so we can work with a realistic hypothetical, and you're telling me about
That's why I brought up the car example.
Yeah, but this seems like you should never have a golf course set up where there's a parking lot where a bunch of people are swinging.
What car example?
Rem, hold on. What about a gust of wind, Destiny, that just, indirectly hits you while you're shooting, and that trajectory that you initially lined up ends up hitting someone in the face?
No, the car example did not fall through. Related it to the wrong thing.
I would argue that like the way that golf courses should be built should make that almost impossible. I don't know if wind can honestly 90-degree angle like a golf ball.
No, wind can't help.
Yeah, but that's the point. Destiny is even in
it is possible. Sure. Yeah, it is possible that maybe we could conceive of. Yeah, maybe we could conceive of an idea. Okay, wait, real quick. Okay, before we go off, anything else? Okay, I acknowledge that there might be things where like an act of God, like a nature thing, can maybe be something that there was just no way. So let's say I park a friend's car outside of their house and a fucking freak tsunami happens or whatever that I would have never been like, oh my God. And then it washes his car away. Then sure, in that case, yeah, then my action couldn't have me be held like morally culpable. I can acknowledge in those cases, sure.
So like the car example.
The car example is disanalogous because the killing of the person is something that can be avoided in an abortion.
That's not. I am not. But no. This is what I was. This is the issue. Is we're no longer talking about the act of killing the fetus. You specifically objected to the idea that there could be a case where I'm doing something for pleasure and I harm someone and there's no moral culpability. That is what you're objecting to.
Okay. If the result of that harm is due to an insane act of God that is beyond your control or is unknowable to you, then yes, I would acknowledge that's fine. Sure, you can engage in a pleasurable activity, and if some crazy act of God,
the car example is not unknowable. I can know that there is a possibility. Everyone knows that there's a possibility that they could literally drop dead. That is a statistical chance that is always present in our lives.
I don't think I acknowledge this to the same level. Like this would be at there would be a different classification.
Like that there is a possibility that is there.
Sure, but this would be under a different classification of like the possibility of getting somebody at 15 orders of magnitude would be where I would draw the line.
So you're making a quantitative analysis instead of a qualitative analysis at this point is what you're saying, right?
Sure, I would argue that like the chances of a random person dropping dead is not the same as the chances of getting somebody pregnant while having sex.
But then this goes back to the prior example of having sex, right? There's always a quantitative degree of not having a baby, and that's also not in the intention of the people that have sex.
Sure.
So the distinction between you and the person that's arguing against your position is just a matter of degree at this point. Quantitative degree is what you're admitting to.
Yeah, but the difference is that we're saying that as a result of one of those harmful acts or whatever, when we have a choice to mitigate the damage done to the third party, that we go ahead and go forward with it anyway, right?
The point is that you always have a choice We always have a counterfactual possibility, right? So that's why it's a difference in degree and not
But
quality.
we don't always have the counterfactual after the bad event has occurred. So for instance, if I'm driving with a kid in the backseat and I have a heart attack, I don't have a choice at that point. Like, okay, fuck, should I kill the kid or not? Right? The bad event is going to be coupled with the act of God. Whereas for sex, we have a choice afterwards.
But you do have the choice never to drive because it's riskier to drive, right? So
well, you have that choice. You have that choice with sex as well, to never have sex.
Yeah,
right?
but I know, but that's why it's silly, right? Because the argument is if you go in a car with your child, right, and you have a higher chance of it crashing, you wouldn't be morally culpable during a crash if someone else hit you and hurt your child, that you're actually responsible for the child being hurt, right? We would just say it's whoever crashed into you.
Well, but we would argue that there is some level of moral culpability if you have the option to like mitigate the damages after.
You have the option by not driving your kid.
But we have the option in the case of sex in having or not having an abortion.
No, but okay, so Destiny, what I was specifically
right, but the point
you made the blatant statement, unless you were now, dare I say it, backpedaling or adjusting or qualifying, which is totally fine, but you were making the claim that there is no specific pleasurable action you could take that could cause harm to someone.
Okay, no, you're right. Okay, I have to reform this because your analogies are so fucking horrible. It's like fucking my brain up. So earlier, I don't know if I said this specifically, but what I was saying was there's no pleasurable act that were you to take precautions would give you the right to murder a third party. That was what I meant to say earlier, but I didn't say that exactly. Now, are there pleasurable acts you could do? Okay, my bad. Is there an act you could do that you could take precautions, blah 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 blah, that maybe could result in harm to a third party? Sure, act of God, like inside of this, sure, that is a possibility.
Without being morally culpable.
Without being morally, yeah, sure.
Okay.
But none that would give you the right to kill somebody afterwards.
Absolutely, not solely.
Which is the case with abortion.
But my whole point of bringing this up in the first place was it being a factor, something being relevant to the decision. About
okay, can you tell me how it's relevant in the abortion argument?
Because it's a morally salient feature of any sort of case. Is the intention?
Can you tell me how it's relevant in the abortion argument?
What do you mean?
How is somebody taking a precaution make it okay for them to murder a child afterwards if they accidentally end up with one?
That's not what I said.
Hold on.
Is
the argument that you're proposing that you can retroactively make amends for a situation even if you weren't intentional or unintentionally responsible for?
No, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to decouple the abortion from the pregnancy. These aren't the same act. These aren't like the same thing as having a heart attack in a car and having the child die.
Yeah, but you already agree that a person who isn't responsible for having a child has the right to have an abortion, right? In the case that they're raped. So you already
I never said that. I never said that. What do you mean?
Okay, I assume that this would be your position. So you're saying that someone is morally culpable, it has to basically keep a child in them even though they're raped?
If you say that the child is a living human being, I think you have to, yeah. Even in the case of rape, you can't say like, well, they were raped, time to kill the kid. If you believe that it's a human being, I don't think you can do that.
But then the violin scenario would be a good intuition pump, basically, to bring up about, let's say that you are hooked up to a person by blood and you're kidnapped, right? I mean, why wouldn't that person be capable of just disconnecting themselves? Rather not capable, but ought to if they want to.
I think
you don't think they should?
I think it's a hard one. But I mean, I think it would still be murder. If you were to argue that the violin is a living person, same thing with the abortion of a pregnant child. The only difference is that you might be able to put the culpability on the person doing the rape or the person that hooked you up would be the difference.
But that's an extreme position, though, Destiny. I mean, that basically means that even if we're kidnapped and we are incidentally put into a situation, we don't have the choice to dehook ourselves. So if I was to, if you were kidnapped, you wouldn't disconnect. You would just stay with that person, say, for the rest of your life if you had to.
I mean, like I said, so you can argue that the act is bad, but the culpability for the act doesn't fall on the person doing the abortion. You could say that the act itself, the negative act, doesn't fall on the person doing the abortion, but the person that originally put them in that place. It's possible to say that, right? So, for instance, if somebody kidnaps you, hooks you up to a violinist or whatever, and then that person is like, well, I want to disconnect and peace out of here, fuck that. You can argue that the person that put them in that situation in the first place is the one that's culpable for the death of the violinist, maybe not necessarily the person who's disconnecting at that point.
Yeah, the violinist analogy is so poor because of to be a correct analogy, basically it should be framed like you enroll in like a certain organization that
where there's a 2% chance of you being hooked up to a violin. But he's using it as an analogy for rape, and it works here. It's fine for that. And since I said that even in the case of a rape would be murdered, now he's using the violent analogy because he says it would still hold, which is true. But then my answer I don't think would be changed.
Yeah, no, I don't think it would either. I mean, the biggest issue I have with
Well, one of the issues that I have is that Destiny's talking like at 80 miles per hour here.
That's because I had Rem in here throwing all these fucking curveballs at me while I'm just trying to have a goddamn conversation, Marty.
Curveballs? What do you mean curveballs? I brought up one other potential factor that could be relevant in determining whether or not abortion is relevant or not.
Okay.
Because it-
It's like talking with Ben Shapiro at this
Good.
time.
I'm glad. That's what I try to be, the bench for the left. Okay, wait. So wait, did I say anything that you disagree with, or do you, for the most part, agree with, or what? Go, Marty.
Well, I don't know because Rem interrupted the conversation, so I lost my train of thought. So I'm just trying to recapitulate your points here, just so I have them all informed.
Okay.
So you think that it's feasible in the violent scenario to, it's not feasible in the violent scenario to unhook yourself from the other person.
I think you can. I think it would still count as murder, but I think the person culpable for it would be the one that put you in that scenario in the first place.
Okay, so the person who's responsible for that scenario is the person that indirectly put you in that, not necessarily you.
Is if you didn't consent to it in the case of like rape, yeah.
Okay. And God damn it, this is now confusing me.
Good.
I'm gonna have to probably
Think about it. Yeah, good. Like, for instance, if somebody were to drop a baby off at your porch that they wanted you to take care of, and you could either leave it in the cold or feed it, if you had, like, a full family and you couldn't do it or whatever, and you're just like, fuck it, like, I can't, like, leaving the baby there is technically, like, neglect, maybe willful neglect, maybe you could call it murder or whatever, but you wouldn't be the one culpable for it. It would be the person that dropped the kid off. It would be their fault, not yours.
Okay. And in this other scenario of where you have sex,
Mm-hmm.
and you get a child, and the abortion occurs, no one is responsible other than you for that action, is what you're saying?
Well, it would
There
be
can't
the
be
action
other-
would be shared between you and the person that had sex with you, I imagine. It takes
Okay,
two to make a kid.
sure.
Unless you, like, stole their fucking cum or some shit.
So the moral culpability is going to be made based off of the abortion. But it's not in the rape scenario.
Wait, can you explain that? What do you mean?
So the moral culpability seems to be hinging upon the intentional action of who's making the abortion and the person that had sex with them, while in the first example with rape, who's morally culpable is basically the person that kidnaps them.
I think so, yeah. So who were to break it down into two parts, it would be the consenting parties to the actual creation of the child itself, and then it would be the intentional parties to carrying out the abortion. So in the case of a rape, the consenting party is the person doing the rape, not the person being raped. So they would have the moral culpability, and then the abortion itself, would like the intentionality of the abortion itself or whatever would fall on the people that initially consented to the action or whatever, right?
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm trying to see where I think that there was an error earlier, but because I knew there was, and I'm just trying to retrace it, but now my thoughts are scattered because we had like 18 different types of conversations.
I have a question.
What's up?
What's the difference between a pig and a fetus?
There's a million differences. What do you mean?
What is the moral difference?
Well, the moral difference is some people give moral consideration to a kind of thing called a human, and other people don't.
Would you consider yourself pro-life right now?
I don't know. I'm in the middle. I probably, honest to God, lean towards, like, morally, probably pro-choice at the moment.
But you eat pig.
Yeah, because I don't care about pigs.
But what's the moral possible difference between the two?
Are you asking
Why
for
are
me
you
personally?
so uncomfortable about a fetus?
So I don't care about pigs because pigs will never hurt me if I eat them. That's why I eat pigs.
A fetus isn't going to hurt you.
Okay.
So why do you have an issue with it?
Why do I have an issue with aborting fetuses?
Yes.
If we consider fetuses to be humans, and everybody in society acknowledges that fetuses are humans, and if everybody in society acknowledges that we can kill certain types of humans, as long as they're like very inconvenient to other types of humans, I think that sets a bad precedent that could in some ways come around to fuck me at some point in my life.
Why do you place so much relevance on the biological makeup of an organism?
I don't think I mentioned biological makeup of the organism
human.
anywhere there.
Okay, I think I'm ready. I think I'm ready, Dusty.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, like, so human. I don't think there's like a biological argument here. It's just that's like a classification of thing. It's a kind of thing that like other humans like acknowledge as having like moral relevance or whatever.
No. Okay. Do you mean persons or no? Okay.
Maybe I should say persons, yeah, instead of humans.
Well, but a fetus is not a person.
Okay, what? Catch me up on your definitions.
Well, I want to let Marty go on first.
Okay.
Okay, so
Swap out.
hopefully I'll have this. I could still mess up, and I'll need to backpedal here for a second. But
Good luck.
Let's go
I'll be
through it.
screaming at you if you do, so don't worry.
Okay, so the violin example is okay. So let's relate the violin example, a person that's being raped in that example, and then let's also have the third example, which is intentional actions to have sex.
Okay.
In none of these, the agent consented to having children.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Okay, but you can have sex without necessarily consenting to have children, right?
I don't know if I agree with that. Well,
Why?
consenting to have children, maybe not, because you can have an abortion. But how about we'll say more specifically, consenting to being pregnant?
It's just mean you could possibly be pregnant, right? But you don't make the intentional action to become pregnant.
Sure, but you have to accept the responsibility if you do.
Okay, so why do you have to accept the responsibility in something that you don't intentionally aim for in the sense of when you have consensual sex any more than you do in the other two examples with being raped and the violinist?
Being raped and the violinist. Well, in the rape one, you're not consenting to the act of sex, no?
Right, but why is the sort of indirect consequence of having the indirect causal, how do I formulate this? So as an indirect result of all three of these scenarios,
Okay.
you have a baby. That's just a possible event that occurs that was unaccounted for.
Well, but it should be accounted for. You know that when you have sex, there's a possibility of having a kid, right?
Yeah, in the same sense that you also think that there's a possibility in the event that you go outside and you get raped, or let's say that you have a conversation on the air or whatever, and this pisses a lot of people off, so they decide to kidnap you. So these are all going to indirectly lead to you getting pregnant, or you can quote unquote be responsible for those types of events.
So I think the difference is that we wouldn't say that you're responsible for the actions of another person that we would consider like their own autonomous agent. So for instance, like if I say something and somebody else comes and murders me, I would say, well, that's not my fault because that required another autonomous agent to make a choice to do something.
What about in examples then of where we offer a fourth example of you happen to get pregnant from some sort of procedure? No intentional action was being done by anyone. It just sort of accidentally happens. Let's just say an accident.
Okay, extreme hypothetical, but sure, we'll say that. Then if you do have an abortion in that case, it's probably your right to, but we would still call it murder, but the culpability would be on the person that performed that procedure that made you pregnant.
Let's just say that there was no procedure, but that this was based off of some sort of something like the example that Rem gave, or the one that we had earlier about the sort of seed floating around the air like dandelions.
Okay, hold on. We're on 12 levels of irony right now. Okay, let me think about this. So you're saying, what if there was a chance that you could become spontaneously pregnant? Is that what we're kind of...
Well, it's not even spontaneously pregnant. Let's say there's a causal explanation, but it's not an intentional explanation.
Kinda like how the person in the car has a heart attack is still a...
So we're saying that somebody engages in some intentional act, like going to school. How about, let's say, sitting on a toilet seat, like that?
Sure.
And then becomes pregnant.
I was actually thinking about this example a minute ago, but I thought it'd be way too weird to bring up. I'm very happy you brought it up.
Sure. I mean, in that case, then, I don't think they would be at fault for being pregnant. Sure.
Okay, so if they're not at fault at being pregnant in that scenario because there's an indirect causal relationship there, So what you're basically saying is that the only thing that would make them is responsible for these sorts of actions is if there's an intent behind them in the first place?
Well, consenting to the act is what makes you culpable if you go through with the abortion afterwards, right? So like,
but that doesn't seem to matter in the first two examples. So I don't see why it would matter in the third and fourth.
What do you mean? What do you mean it doesn't matter?
Well, I mean, in the first scenario of where you're someone else is responsible for it, in the scenario of where you get raped or the violinist scenario, right?
Mm-hmm.
Depending on what type of action that you're making, that is when you make the abortion choice, it doesn't seem to matter, right? Because who's ever morally responsible for that would be not you.
So what? So
these other two scenarios, it suddenly is your responsibility, and it suddenly is your responsibility because of what exactly?
Well, because you're pregnant. So now next
you're pregnant in all four examples.
Yeah, no, I understand. So using the logic that I've laid out thus far, the answer would be that you could have an abortion since you didn't consent to it initially, and there was no way of you to know that risk ever. But then the fault would lie on nobody, basically, right?
Well, that's just to say that it's ethically permissible, right? If no one's at fault.
Okay. That would have to logically follow from what I said earlier, right?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that would be true then, right? It would have to be. Yeah, I think so. So if you spontaneously get pregnant, or there's some causal thing, some indirect causal thing that nobody could possibly know about, and then you become pregnant, would you have an obligation to make some sacrifice to carry this person to term? And no, I don't think. Yeah, no, I don't think in that case. I don't think you would. No.
So you're basically just saying it's a matter of degree from what we can consider an intentional action to be that would then hold a person morally responsible.
Yeah.
But again, I don't think that they're intending to have a baby. I think that this is just a sort of indirect consequence of having sex.
So like, okay, so
just in the same sense
sure.
that
So let me hit you. Yeah, so
I'll
hit you up with
of going outside.
Yeah, sure. So I'll hit you up with a counterexample. We'll see. So let's say that I invest in a stock. My intention is never to lose money on it, but I have to accept while investing that it's a potential that I could lose money on it. Even if I'm making safe investments, I have to accept that my account could go to zero. Wouldn't I argue that this is similar to that? You have sex, you don't want to have a kid, but you acknowledge that it's a possibility that you can. Like, you have to acknowledge it. You know it's possible if you're educated. So what's the difference?
It's a good counterexample. I'd have to think about it, Destiny.
Okay, well, Marty.
Hold on.
If you impregnated me, I would keep the baby, Destiny-chan.
So my argument is that you don't accept an outcome whenever you do things, okay? In actuality, philosophy is like quantum mechanics. There's a waveform that could collapse onto any number of outcomes, and when you go to make a decision, you accept that there's some percentage of those that might be not favorable, would be my argument.
I don't understand your stock example.
Yeah, it seems as though he's resting intentional versus unintentional actions. Actually, just resting culpable responsibility based on probability at this point.
Yeah,
but a probability that you have to be aware of, that you should be aware of, not that you're not aware of.
Right, but that's also going to be based on probability, whether you're aware of that or.
Yeah, of course, right. Sure.
That's why I talked about quantifiably. Where do you draw that line?
Yeah, of course. So there might be two kids that are poor that legit don't know that two 10-year-olds fuck each other and get pregnant. They don't know that that's how babies are made. You would evaluate that case a lot differently, sure.
Is this just arbitrary?
But this isn't arbitrary. This seems to rest upon not intentions, but some sort of causal factors that either hit a certain threshold or don't hit a certain threshold.
Well, the threshold, it's a binary. It's a binary. Do you know that you could have a kid, or do you know that that's not how kids are made?
Yeah, but that binary is based upon some sort of probability.
Yeah.
Causal probability. So you're basically reducing intentional actions to causal explanations.
What do you mean by that? When you say based on probability, they either know or they don't know. No? I mean, there's a probability that they might know or they might not know.
My roommate. Well, Sorry, what was the last thing you said?
Okay, I'm putting us on a 3-minute time limit until my next league game starts. I'm queuing up. Okay.
Holy shit, dude, that's impossible. I can't
Good.
do that.
You're on that. Okay. Well, wait. So what are you saying that there's like a probability? I'm saying that this is binary. They either know or they don't know. There might be a probability that they know or they don't know, but that state of knowing or not knowing is binary, isn't it?
I don't know, because you're saying in certain examples of, going out to the park, that's not an intentional action because of certain types of causal implications. In the sort of, you get pregnant, like sort of dandelions float in the air and then they go inside of you. Or, I don't know, you sit on a toilet or something like that. And these scenarios are just basically saying that there's a list of causal factors that you're not responsible for, as opposed to in another scenario where you're having sex with someone, you are suddenly responsible because this is a different set of causal factors.
Well, yeah, I guess like I don't know of any ways by which you could become spontaneously pregnant. I'm not trying to say we need an empirical example, but like I feel like all of the ways in which you can become pregnant, you're typically consenting to some action where you recognize that some percentage probability exists that you could become pregnant. So in some ways, you have to accept those consequences of that act.
Right, so the probabilities are what ultimately underlie the binary that you're describing, right? Because whether or not that binary comes into any sort of thought is going to be reliant upon a certain probability being met, right? Whether it's probable enough that that is going to be a relevant thing to be thinking about when you're performing an action.
Sure.
Right? So at the root of it, it's still probabilistic, and in that sense, it seems to be a bit of an arbitrary line of where you want to draw that.
I don't know if probabilistic is the same thing as arbitrary, Rim.
No, I'm not at all saying that probability. Well, actually, I do think it's arbitrary because I don't think probability is objective. But I mean,
but
it's arbitrary in the sense that where you want to draw that line, it seems to me there's not going to be any real good case to make it one over the other.
What if someone was to run this argument against you, Reb, that what we base the good upon is just going to be particular examples that are arbitrary to begin with?
Well, that's basically particularism, isn't it?
Yeah, but they would just say something like, you just have a sort of extra step by saying it is innately tailored to some sort of form of the good, but I'm just going to innately tailor it down to some sort of particular causal or experiential event.
No, well, I mean, there are going to be further arguments to be made, but the reason why I'd be calling the probabilistic case, because like, let's say 0.49 versus 0.5, what is the case for choosing 0.49 over 0.5?
Do you think that you could also argue?
Yeah, but what's the reason for any sort of ethical judgment, right?
I mean, there's so many arguments that you could possibly bring out, right? You could talk about reasons being relevant, but none of that is going to be relevant.
Yeah, but there are multiple types of reasons, and there's more types of reasons that are just going to eventually just bottom out and intrinsically having a certain value to them. Just like we intrinsically talk about probability.
For this type of thing, can we talk about the type of action that led to the consequences being like relevant to this? So, for instance, maybe we acknowledge that by picking up a baby and carrying it across the room, that there's a non-zero chance that I have an aneurysm and I fall over and kill the baby, right? That could happen. But we would argue that like picking a child up and carrying it to some place is a different type of act than doing some pleasurable event that might result in the harm.
That's
what I was pushing against you earlier on.
Yeah, we acknowledge that that's your argument, right? That it's just a matter of degree at this point. But if you're going to argue for degree, right, just some sort of probabilistic causal features, and this is at best, a kind of okay argument. It's not going to be like something definitive that people can sink their teeth into and say, this is the line that I have. I'm going to go to the debate right now, and I'm going to debate this guy, and he's going to just see what's up with this argument, right? This is just going to lead to several types of contingent state of affairs, and it's going to be really hard to demarcate exactly what we ought to do in this scenario.
That's going to be pretty true no matter what, though, right? Like, is there any... in my understanding is that abortion is literally, this argument is laying at the fringes of like, what is a human? What is a conscious being? Like this is like at the fringes of like a lot of different types of ethical questions, right? Like,
well, I don't think the question of what a conscious being is very controversial. I think it's what an agent is or what a human being is. But yeah, I do agree with you.
It's definitely controversial.
Well, I imagine that like agent and human being could probably like reduce to conscious state of or whatever, right? Like,
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I mean, like you say that like what is a conscious being isn't controversial, but rather what is an agent. I imagine that maybe I'm just not using the right vocabulary, but these words are probably somewhat interchangeable. I have a hard time believing that people think that things that aren't conscious are also agents, or maybe they could be, and I just don't know about it.
Well, no, it's well, you could. It depends on what your criterion of agency is. People sometimes do. I mean, panpsychists, for example, do have a form of minimal agency that doesn't necessarily have to have a conscious structure. All right, no, I guess panpsychist would. I mean, yeah, panpsychist would have to say it's just not going to be the type of consciousness that we're generally alluding to when we're talking about human consciousness. And then you could also basically say we can be conscious but not agents, and being conscious would be insufficient to basically consider a person as someone that we need to be morally responsible for.
Sure.
Right? So, yeah, I mean, these would be just other types of arguments. But I agree with you to some extent that, yeah, it's gonna be kind of a continuum, but that's not to say that I think, and maybe you're not saying this, that every philosophical debate is going to be, based on gradients or continuums or something like that.
Yeah, I'm curious about this one. You're lucky we had to dodge a game. Let's say that there was a 50% chance that you got pregnant every time you had sex, even with the best birth control. Would you still feel the same way about this, or would that change the way that you weigh this at all?
Well, first of all, I mean, after this conversation, I'm going to have to rethink about how to formulate all this. My initial one was just pro-choice, and I don't think the probability would matter too much unless you're just going to hinge it on probability. If that is the case, then you would just win by default, right? I would just admit that this is always going to be a probability based on certain types of causal factors.
So even if there was a 50% chance of somebody having a pregnancy every time, and we acknowledge that the pregnancy is like a moral kid, like a moral agent, like a child that gets moral consideration, you'd still be like, okay, yeah, fine, you can just abort over and over again. That wouldn't change the way that you would weigh that at all?
I don't know if it would.
Huh.
No.
Okay. I feel like for most
Because,
people,
I mean,
intuitively, not to say that it's a good argument, but I feel like for most people that would change things quite a bit.
I would be happy to do it.
I never say happy, because even if we could, because here's the thing, right? I mean, if you do argue for whatever type of position that the violinist experiment has, and you buy into all of her beliefs, you're at the same time already sort of agnostic, or at least not me. You could at least expect that this is a human life.
Sure.
So even though we do have autonomy over ourselves and we can abort the fetus or whatever, that's not to say that it's not a human life.
Well, that's my
be...
problem, is that if it's a human life, it seems really hard to take these arguments.
No, this is what I was trying to. Why the fuck does it matter if it's human or not?
No, not human. Fucking Christ! I don't mean fucking human. I mean a person, Rem. A person. Okay, that's what the question is about. Okay. No. Most people that are pro-life would consider fetuses to be human, person, whatever the fuck you call them. Yes.
No, Rem. What I'm saying is, it wouldn't matter ultimately for the choice, but it would still be a life, and we shouldn't be flippant about it, is what I'm saying.
Well,
right?
no, I disagree. It would be like the argument is literally, like in the Warren paper, the argument is literally having an abortion is the exact same as just trimming your hair.
Okay, well, I guess I disagree with that.
Right, well, that's the majority opinion in the literature on abortion, right? It is.
But I don't understand how that entails being flippant, right? So, like, you could still consider it if
it's literally the equivalent of
life,
cutting your hair.
Yeah, but no, it wouldn't be, because it would still be a human life, right? The point is whether there's a certain level of autonomy granted to a
Marty,
woman, basically.
When you say human life, do you mean a person deserving of any sort of moral status, or do you mean an organism?
Yeah.
That's what I can't, like, having like a person to like.
I think it's the same thing.
How is it? Oh no, but this is the whole thing: is that if you view an abortion as just cutting your hair, you are already acknowledging.
That's not the same thing. That's a different set of arguments, right? That's
no. But the reason why cutting the hair, why it is just cutting hair, is because a fetus, even though it's a human person
Steven feels
or
weird,
human
man.
being, not a person.
Rem, I get that that's an argument. I just don't think that portion of the argument works.
Wait, which portion of the argument? What do you mean?
That's clearly what Destiny thinks is relevant.
Well, I understand that that's what he thinks is relevant, but it wouldn't matter that he thought that was relevant and that's a human life if we can prove that even though it's a human life, we still have the choice of aborting, right?
Yeah.
My point is that sure, we have the right to abort, but we shouldn't be flippant about it, right? If we can make certain types of actions, then why not make those certain types of actions to keep the fetus alive, right? Like, it's still like we can't just like clown around.
Well, but then in that case, why would you ever be in favor of an abortion when most of the time an abortion is just done for the sake of convenience for the life of the mother? Like, most abortions are done out of convenience. We can call it like an extreme inconvenience or whatever, but like it's not going to kill most people to carry a kid to term and then suffer through the rest of life. Yeah.
I disconnected accidentally.
Oh, sorry. Well, in that case, like, because most abortions are done for the sake of convenience. You're either too early in life to have a kid, you don't have the financial means to take care of it. Like, these are abortions for convenience generally. So how could you ever, if you believe that a fetus is a human life, how could you justify that exchange, the murder of a person for the convenience of someone else or two other people?
Well, in the same way that you can justify that, you know, in the scenario with the violinist, you, even though you're hooked up to them, you still have autonomy because your own intentional, in virtue of you being living and having intentions and all that, you could still make that decision, right? They're parasitic upon you.
Okay, here. So I think Rem was going to bring this example earlier. What if you enrolled in music school, okay, and your class size is 100 students, and every time you enroll in that class, there's one student in that class is hooked up to their professor, their violinist professor, and he has to stay hooked up and walk around with them for 9 months or whatever. Would you say that a person that signs up to that class willingly, knowing that 1 out of 100 students is randomly elected to be hooked up to the professor, that student could say like, hey, sorry, professor, I'm going to unhook and you're going to die, bye, even though he fully walked into that class knowing the outcome? Or
that they can unhook themselves even though they intentionally signed up for it?
Yeah.
God, I don't know, man, because this gets into another thought experiment, which I don't know the answer to. And, you know, whether intentional actions are sufficient enough to, you know, go through with a thought experiment like that. I mean, I don't know whether or not a person can be held accountable for their intentional actions when they go through that type of scenario, because I don't think that, you know, you intending to do something is going to always give you enough information to be a rational agent about the scenarios that you're in. So, like, I mean, one example that comes to sort of to mind is, are you familiar with like McKinney Manor at all, Destiny?
Oh yeah, very much. I've read all of his literature, but can you go ahead and give the chat a refresher real quick?
It's just the idea that there's a sort of spooky haunted mansion that people go to get tortured for 4 to 5 hours. They intentionally consent to all these types of actions, yada, yada, yada. But none of them really get through with it. A lot of them end up in sort of trauma. I don't know if they go through PTSD, probably do. Is the scenario ethical or not? Well, they all intentionally signed up for it. So therefore, it's ethical according to some people. But I think that just because it's an intentional action doesn't mean that these people can be morally responsible for their decision there, because they come to new conclusions or rational realizations in the process, namely that something about the experience that wouldn't have been conveyed prior when they made the intentional actions. And
yeah, I'm aware. There's some forms of like decision theory that like when you move farther down a tree, you become like a different agent or whatever, that if you could go back, you would make like a different decision after uncovering some information. The only thing that makes this a little bit more complicated with abortion is that you have a third party now that's being punished for your decision, or you're asking like, is it okay for you to punish a third party as a result of the decision you made when you thought that you were informed? I think is what makes this a little bit more complicated. Like for instance, like in this thing, so someone in chat said he's making a withdrawal of consent argument. That like in this, like withdrawing consent after going through the torture, say for 2 or 3 hours, might be like you leave early and then maybe you have some trauma or whatever. But in the case of an abortion, withdrawing consent means you're killing somebody else because you're like, oh fuck this, like I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, maybe, or it could be viewed in the sense that when I had sex, right, I didn't know exactly what I was getting into and the sort of probability, and then it sort of dawns upon me that I'm having a child and I want to opt out of this. And if it is in my body, right, I at every point get to intentionally decide, since it's in my body, whether or not.
But is the opt out if that results in the murder of somebody else, is that opt out acceptable? Let's say
well, but that's what the violinist experiment is doing. I think it's in certain exceptional cases that the answer would be yes, right?
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out, right? If that violinist argument, instead of you being forced there, was you signing up for a class, it seems like it's much harder to answer that question, because you would argue, well, you knew what you were signing up for, that there was a slim chance.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like with the sex example, I don't know. I mean, you kind of know what you're signing up for, but it's still also, you know, going to be not an intentional action, but just a matter of something indirectly coming about.
Sure.
So the only difference between this is, again, a matter of sort of probabilistic degree, which is the sort of end result of what we came down to in our earlier conclusion.
What if we were to do this in an adoption clinic? We were decided to adopt somebody because it sounds like a lot of fun. We want to have a kid. We can hide it in lockers and scare people. We can throw it at neighbors, whatever. It's fun or whatever. So we go and adopt a kid, and then we find out, holy shit, this is way more work than I thought it would be. I have to change diapers. It cries at odd times of the day. I have to drive it to fucking school. Fuck all this shit. I don't want the kid anymore. I'm just going to kill it. Like, could we make a similar argument there that somebody adopting a kid didn't know like everything they were getting themselves into, so they have a right afterwards?
Well, in this, you don't have to abort it. I mean,
you would have to kill
put it back.
Sure.
No, you just have to put it back into, you know,
into an adoption care, sure. But like, let's say that's for, well, I understand this is kind of an absurd hypothetical, but let's say that is the option. You either keep it or kill it. Would you say, well, that person should be forced to raise it for the rest of their lives because they initially accepted the responsibility of adopting a kid, or should they be allowed to just terminate the person's life? I think Singer takes a position like this where he's okay with abortion up to like a certain age or whatever.
Is that a fair question if there are no possible worlds in which we would have to necessarily kill it? Because, I mean, if you're saying that it necessarily has to die, then, of course, I wouldn't do that, right? But it just doesn't seem like in any possible world that would necessarily have to occur.
Well, but I mean, that's the same with abortion now. You don't necessarily have to abort on a child. You could give it, you know, you could give birth to it and then give it up for adoption, right?
Yeah, but how is that analogous to what we're talking about?
Well, because you're making it sound like it seems weird to engage with this hypothetical. We don't have to kill the kid after we've adopted it. We could just give it back. I mean, in the case you
you could give it, but you can't, you know, you can't just decide to have it outside of your body and it just kind of preserves itself on its own, right?
I mean, there's like a time limit on it, but yeah.
Well, that's the analogy. So if we did have the option of, say, getting it out of our body and then putting it into some sort of container of where it could survive on its own or basically be dependent upon a machine that takes care of it. Then in those scenarios, I think that we'd have to opt out 100% of the time to just do that instead of killing it, right? Because I believe in that it has a sort of life.
Okay, so I'll try to get you then on this. I'm curious then. Let's say that right now, medical technology has advanced to the point to where a fetus that is 1 month old is now viable outside of the womb. Do you think there's an obligation to the state that anytime a woman wants to have an abortion, if the fetus is at least 1 month old, that it should be raised to full term inside of like an embryonic whatever bullshit?
Probably, but I mean, like, that just seems like it would spiral down to economical, financial issues, and then we'd have to debate about how those are at all plausible.
Well, sure, yeah, we're not talking about economics or finance. I'm just curious now, because then the reason why because I considered this argument a long time ago, but the thing that made me uncomfortable with this was that whether or not you got to live, if we consider like a fetus a person or something worthy of moral rights, whether or not you got to live basically just depends on the technology of the era that determines like how early you're viable outside of the womb, which seemed like kind of a weird...
Well, that's just... I don't know if that's weird. That just seems like sort of the product of our times.
Maybe. Okay, I'm starting my game in less than 1 minute. Hit me up with your final thoughts. Go.
Well, just the idea that if we can make certain types of ethical actions that would be good for the fetus, we ought to, right, since it's already a human life. And if we can't, then we do the second best choice, in the sense the second best choice being whatever is autonomous for the woman host, right?
Okay. Cool. All right. Anything else, you two? I love you both. Plug your
Are
Discord.
pigs equivalent to fetuses then?
We'll talk about that later, but
I'm just fucking with you.
But you know I'll take some Aristotelian positions right here, so you won't like those.
No.
Okay. I love you both. It's been fun, okay?
Good night, everybody.
Be careful, okay? I'm sorry for screaming at both of you, okay? I love you all very much.
I'm used to it at this point.
Well, you didn't scream at me, actually.
Okay.
Well, no, yes, he definitely did on a couple of points.
I'll make sure next time to do it, okay? All right, be careful.
Well, I didn't notice, so it's okay.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I didn't say it's the men's fault. I said it's a little bit more complicated and they're trying to blame, like, oh, it's the women, oh, it's the men, blah, blah, blah. That either side, that's a really one-dimensional way of looking at it.